Okay, here's the thing. I don't know about you, but if I was, quote, at the end of my rope, or having a bad day, and fed up, unquote, I probably wouldn't be too selective about who I would express that frustration towards. And that's the thing that bothers me about Atlanta. It felt selective. It certainly didn't feel random. And it sure as hell felt worse than that. Hashtag stop Asian hate crimes.
The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
For Saturday night, March 27th, 2021, this is episode 38 of the Anime Roundtable Canada. Good evening once again, 10 minutes south of the Anime North compound in the west end of Toronto, Mike Nicolas at 6 points. James Austin, Kevin Ng, Mohamed Sharmarke, and Geoff Greig not at 6 points. A quick reminder that we encourage people to write in and give their 2 cents on the conversation. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com is our email. At Anime Roundtable, you can find us there on Twitter and Instagram. AnimeRoundtable.com for our show notes and past episodes. We're on Facebook, we're on Discord, and maybe, just maybe, a YouTube or a Twitch channel coming soon to a device near you. And we really hope you do give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram, or Twitter or Instagram, because you'll almost for sure get a personal thank you from us, which means me. Okay, I just realized we didn't do a COVID update last episode. And with the way the last couple weeks have gone, we really don't want to let people know that the variants of concern are winning.
Those damn concerns.
Here in Ontario, the number of daily cases have unfortunately shot up quite a bit. The blame is on said variants of concern.
And the government.
And the warm weather.
You can blame a bunch of things. Just the bottom line is, over the last 3 days, cases have been over 2,000 daily. And I'd say we peaked at just at over 2,400, but I get the feeling that number is going up. Ontario was over 2,400 today, more specifically 2,453.
But by the time you guys listen to this episode, we'll be at least 3,000.
Yeah.
I say 4.
All right. I
see your 4 and I raise you 5. How about that?
Let's
Can
go.
we talk about this more in trying to get shots in arms, maybe?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and just to add to just to finish up on those numbers, 16 more deaths recorded. I think that's the first time. See, I'm trying to remember the last time we had a double-digit number of deaths to be announced, because I don't think that we were over 10 yesterday, but unfortunately. So, and ICU capacity apparently is getting a little bit more squeezed as well. If you're to listen to doctors they've been interviewing in the last 24 to 48 hours, although there are enough people out there who says, what the hell do doctors know? So on that note, also, yeah, there's also the vaccination programs are continuing. Canada, for its part, has had some issues, but we're trudging along, I guess. I don't know what else to say to add to that.
There's many things to think about in our programs of how things were done. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, of course, hindsight is 2020.
Well, there's still things we could think about. It's like
Mhm.
we look about how they spread out the vaccine across the country, and they should have went with more triaged approach, trying to hit those hard hit areas. But they've kind of went for the
Yeah,
general approach where
that's
everyone got the same amount, which doesn't
It's
exactly help and helps those higher risk areas
I
still
sure, that's
be
right.
trouble.
The green areas in Ontario, the ones that don't have any numbers to tell us about, probably the most open out of all of them.
Yeah,
They get the same number of vaccines as, say, Toronto.
So I
I heard.
wish it was the case that it was an even amount, but there are like some of the hardest hit areas where a lot of vulnerable people. There are no clinics that are running out of pharmacies in those areas, but some relatively affluent areas where there's relatively low caseloads have like three for the same amount of space and people. It's ridiculous.
I heard
It's
Northern Etobicoke was the exact case of this being a problem.
Yeah, but
hmm.
it's Etobicoke and Scarborough, where the richer parts of Scarborough, like again, like the beach, have like loads, well, relatively loads of clinics, but places North Scarborough, relatively few to zero.
Hmm.
Bye.
Yeah. Well,
And then the thing is, we do when people do get the shots. We've heard stories, example on the GO train, example that they think they don't have to wear their mask, and you're like, well, no, we're not out of the woods yet. And there is
yeah.
the other problem of we've heard different science and stuff like that. That how they said 30 days later you should get your second shot if you're getting one of those vaccines. Some of them are delaying that appointment for later, which is odd because what happens, like you want to get those antibodies, then get it so that the shot's effective the second time. You know what I mean?
It's 4 months now.
It's
which
4 months.
is
Which is kind
ridiculous.
of
That's too long, way too long.
Wow,
Well,
really?
Yeah,
yeah.
people
I
are
mean,
getting their appointments.
does the like as I said, this is one of those I'm no doctor lines. How like does spreading out
Well, my
the
mom was an
vaccine? How much?
ICU nurse, and and we've been talking about this, and I can tell you a lot of these are concerns. She's just shaking her head. It's like, what's going on here, guys?
Okay.
This is a health issue. This isn't a, we're going to win back votes or we're going to do whatever. We got to actually deal with this in reality and deal with this as medical professionals. And I'm sure there are many people telling those same things, right, to
Yeah.
politicians and whoever, but for whatever reason, they're not winning the battle, right?
Mhm. Your mother's been vaccinated?
No, she hasn't. They're
Okay.
just 70, so they're hoping that maybe Peel will start allowing them to call in, just like I've heard, I think
Okay.
Toronto is, or no.
Well, my mother got vaccinated last week, and she's in the same cohort, I think, as yours. But I think your mom sounds like she should have been by now as well.
Well, my mom and dad just turned 70, so they
Okay,
were looking
my
at it.
parents are are a little older than that. And by the way, happy birthday, Pop! Today's his birthday.
Hey, happy birthday!
But they were talking about that too, Mike. It's like obviously they started with older Canadians and stuff like that. And now the other problem they're having is they have all these open appointments they've talked about. And so it's the issue of trying to find these people because some of them are in nursing homes, some of them are in old age homes, some of them are in their own homes, and trying to get an old person out of their home sometimes and into these type of clinics or stuff like that can be problematic. It might have been good in some cases. They have given it to family doctors, and that would be a good thing to do for those older Canadians and stuff like that, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah. How much vaccine hesitancy would you say there is then, from your guess?
I see. That's the thing too. Yeah, we've been hearing things about certain things about clotting and other things, and so it can be a concern with certain people and stuff like that. Because I know my mom, for example, that's a big concern. That could kill her if she has clotting and stuff like that. So for some of those people, there is, I forget which shot it is, but one of them they are gonna avoid and stuff like that if there's a
Oh,
risk about
that's the
clotting. And
AstraZeneca, and that's the
yeah.
one. That's the one that's been talked about over the last couple weeks.
Hmm.
And well, the AstraZeneca one is the one you've been seeing in the pharmacies because that doesn't need as cold a storage temperature as the other ones that have been approved in this country, Moderna and oof,
Pfizer.
Pfizer. Thank you.
But as
And
they say, some of us are doing like, and it isn't like, yeah, you'll do your research on some of these shots. But
nope.
for that one, we want to be sure and stuff like that, because as my mom said, there's some things that if they interact the wrong way, right, it could be detrimental to your health and mean death in some cases.
Yeah.
So,
If it's worth something, when my mother got her shot a week or so ago, she told me it was the Pfizer. And my father was able to sign up for one as well. That'll happen in the coming week, and it'll be at the same place my mother got her shot. My mom, for reference, is a medical lab worker as well. So I think the combination of both her occupation and the fact she is a bit older, she's among the older employees at her lab. She was able to get the shot when she did. And as I said, my father will see that within the coming week. And I guess I guess if you want to, and this is not the right word to use, dodge the AstraZeneca one.
Ooh.
That's not a good word, really.
No.
No, because there's that line: the best vaccine is the first one you're offered.
Exactly.
But if I'm to make a guess, the mass vaccination clinics have the structure to have that deeper cold storage that would safely store things like the Pfizer and the Moderna.
I mean, personally, if I had to choose, I'd go with that J&J shot, one and done.
One and done.
But that's just if I had a choice. But I don't know. I'm hearing about the states and their rollout, and like every day they're lowering their ages. I mean, right now if you're 18 and above, you can get a shot in Minnesota. It's ridiculous.
And
like,
here we are.
Where's our vaccine, man?
one day our cohort will be done in summer, right?
We'll be well, sure. Well, you know who's winning the race, right?
Remember, summer ends like what, September 22nd or something. So
like that, yeah.
That's what I'm figuring is more for our first shot and stuff like that. But unfortunately, we don't have any capacity, so we have to rely on other countries and stuff like that. And unfortunately, we're stuck in a tough spot. That's for sure.
Right.
Because we're getting the supply now, but will we continue to get it? Like they can say, "Oh, we're going to get all these people vaccinated and stuff like that," but until the proof happens, right? We'll see how it goes.
That's what's been hanging over the country in the last week.
And hopefully there won't be any effects on most people, but people want to make sure what they're taking is safe, and that is okay to think about. But I think for all of us with no health issues and stuff like that, we'll take whatever is given to us first.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the other, and I guess just to start to pivot a little bit more and start to come a little bit more local. The other part of the news this week for here in Ontario, or more specifically the GTA, personal services such as haircuts and some gyms, that was more in the news this week because even as some restrictions have lifted a little bit, those businesses have been forced to remain closed. But there's something coming for them, I suppose. Gyms will be allowed to do outdoor classes in the coming week. And if you need a haircut or need to get your nails done, hold out till April 12th, and you'll probably be able to.
April 16th, but I could be wrong.
I thought the number was April 12th, but anyway.
Actually, you're right. It was 12th. It's a Monday.
Yeah,
so that makes sense. But by appointment only, right?
By appointment only.
That will be a race, I'm sure, for some people.
Either that or do what a lot of people have been doing: jumping regions. But it also confirms one other thing. If we're ever going to do a video, it's going to be after April 12th because I badly need a haircut. and who knows?
You don't want to join me, Mike, and grow out the beard?
Well, it looks better on you than it would me. I'm pretty sure of that. But on the topic of jumping regions, thanks for this link to the Cineplex page, James. So
which region are we going to? Alberta, Saskatchewan? Are we going to Atlantic Canada's playground?
All right, road trip.
Can we give the context first?
I heard that anime is played in theaters, correct, Mike?
Yeah. Well, when was the announcement made that at least the Demon Slayer movie was gonna finally come to theaters? Or was it the week before?
It was a few weeks ago, like I think it was early March, right? And they said it was going to come to Canada as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the thing was now on Cineplex, his website, this week we had the Demon Slayer movie for the dub and the sub added, and that's going to start from April 23rd. And the tickets will go on sale this Tuesday, March 30th. And then the other movie that was announced by this month by Funimation, Violet Evergarden, is going to be starting on Good Friday, April 2nd, and its tickets will go on sale March 30th on the Tuesday. But we'll see what happens on that day because we don't have theaters yet. So it'll be interesting to see which theaters show up.
Yeah, this will be. I'm kind of shaking my head when I see this because we don't know the regions yet. So as I said, there's a real possibility of region jumping. Remember all those jokes we made for like the Fate's Day movie late last year,
Yep.
late in 2020? I'm willing to come from Montreal all the way to Peterborough and stuff like that because we are talking and we are talking about the highest grossing film in Japanese theater history.
I
I don't know
think
that
both
doesn't,
could definitely
which may
get
or
a
may not
lot
say too much.
because I can see a lot of people wanting to see Violet Evergarden because Kyoto Animation
Mm-hmm.
was definitely their baby and to support them through their trying times, remember, just trying to get animation on the screen and stuff like that. And then, of course, as you said, Demon Slayer, the big boy, the highest grossing animation this year.
Mm-hmm. Which, and as I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on, almost certainly. But the whole thing is, how would it benefit by its great story, or just being in the right place and right time at this point in history? Save that thought for later, though. That said, well, I've constantly made the joke with you guys about you guys and your region jumping or going to theaters over the last year, and I admit a degree of temptation now about seeing the Demon Slayer movie because I did finish the anime last week. Kevin and Mo watched it with me. We watch partied it on what's the name of that service again?
Totoro.
No,
Tutor.
Which is
Mayuchi
basically they are the ones that decide since Rabbit died, they're like, okay, we're going to be the next Rabbit, but it'll be interesting to see if they find the funding because the reason Rabbit died is they couldn't get the venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one we used, but I know you guys said you didn't do a voice component because what we did on our Discord is we would talk to each other through Discord voice, and then we would use the other functions like you have that text chat in there, and then basically it's just a share screen, right? Share browser that we can all go and then watch whatever through that, and
Yeah,
even share
no,
the remote.
like we've done these things already, and trying to share my screen is kind of tough in those apps for some strange reason. Everything's muted. Can't get any sound of it if I put share a browser. But Tutoru, is that how we pronounce it? That actually worked out very well. So we stuck with everything through that.
And that was similar
Tutoru.
to what Rabbit was, and it was a lot. It's a lot simpler than what Discord did with their video. I think there's still work in progress, but theirs is a different way going about it, of course.
Mm-hmm. So I'm finished Demon Slayer, and I can see a lot of the popularity of it. It okay. Let's. I guess we can bring this up just briefly. There was remember the chat we had with Matt Alt, James, back in December, and Demon Slayer sort of came up in the conversation in the context of yokai.
Correct.
I haven't really done any reading about yokai itself. It's a like how recent a phenomenon is it? How recent a thing is it in terms of being known to the Western English speaking world? the
It's
concepts.
definitely been a long time that we've known about. You look at Yokai Watch and stuff like that. I talked about the recent manga I read, The Girl Without a Face, which involves yokai. So it's
Mhm.
definitely been there, and it's always been there for the since people have been watching anime and stuff like that, even if they didn't know it as
Yeah,
yokai and stuff like
that's
that. As they dug deeper, it's like, oh, this is yokai. And it's like it's the same thing of the Japanese see something in every object, in every presence. You know what I mean? It's similar
well,
to that
something having a
philosophy.
soul.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and that's another theme. The whole we knew of these things without actually knowing the terms. We just knew of the concepts.
I think most, I guess, for especially for Canadian audiences, and I guess American too, Inuyasha, frame them as demon, right? So like that
Mhm.
was the dub
Hmm.
choice. Even though some people would say that yokai would have been a more accurate term for that series.
And it's a term that you can't perfectly map into English, as Matt Alt would have said. So I can, okay, because I look back on it and remember he used the line, he attributed a lot of the success to the whole, to yokai. To some degree, it's just, I guess I just found the stories engaging and some of the themes a lot, some of the other themes more engaging. The whole, you know, perseverance and standing up for your family type themes. Those resonated with me. Of course, the personality of its main character, sometimes cheesy but a likable character. I mean, yeah, I can see it. I've become a bit of a fan, and I certainly really enjoyed watching Demon Slayer. But now that the whole yokai line has been brought in, there's a little bit more curiosity to know what parts of it kind of went over my head. What parts of the concepts did I miss? Or did I miss anything? It's just maybe there's a certain awareness I want to develop here now when I after watching the Demon Slayer anime. So that's just me. Maybe I'll probably put in an order for the manga box when that comes out.
When it
We'll
goes
look
on
at deals.
sale too, of course.
Yeah, we'll look at the deals later. But that's okay. That's a thought on Demon Slayer, and as I said, I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Thanks for helping me finish it, Mike. Thanks
Oh
for
yeah,
helping
that's
me
right.
finish Demon Slayer.
That's the reason. That's the reason why Kevin and Mo hung out with me digitally to
So
watch it
you
because Kevin hadn't
actually
watched the last four
watched.
episodes.
Oh, so you knew Kevin hadn't watched the last four, and that's why
He
you got him to join you. Ah, okay.
I let him know at some point because he got to I think episode 18 or 19, and then I asked, "Hey, uh, would you be willing for us to watch it together?" And Mike obliged,
yeah. The
and I
thing was,
appreciate it.
and here's part of the story because there was this one night on not this past Tuesday, but the Tuesday before. One day I just kept watching an episode and watching an episode just one evening. And before I knew it, I had watched 10 episodes without realizing I was watching 10 episodes.
That's when you know you like a show
That's
Yep, that's when you
yeah,
know.
and
Yeah.
because you
it's
will
just
make the time for it.
yeah, and I forced myself to make the time for it. I forgot what else was on at the. I think I was just watching another Proline ticket lose at the same time. But and by the way, I bought a Proline ticket. Just a quick aside, I bought a Proline ticket to put a small bet on the World Cup qualifying today, the afternoon slate, and all three of them fucked up. Who would have thought that Ireland would lose? Well, never mind that. But
Or
I think
Croatia would lose as well, I think.
well, Croatia lost their first game, but they won earlier, and then well, who would have thought Portugal would have tied? And what's the other score I lost on? Never mind.
Is it
All I
time
know
for
is
football hooliganism?
no. Well, that's another story altogether, but we'll save that for off the air. But where was I? Yeah, you just kept going, and I think that was the first real binge watch I've ever had of anything. like, or at least anything close in years, right? I think I went through like a dozen episodes of Ranma back in the day too. So it was that type of watch for me when I got through the bulk of it, and it kind of plods a little bit because from my understanding is the first season, because there's going to be a second season. The first season just gets through roughly 7 volumes and a couple of really just four major storylines, right? The final selection, and then the forest and the recovery. And everything those 10 episodes covered the first meeting of with Zenitsu and the mansion, and then the bulk of the forest. And in some ways it plods kind of slowly, but it's so engaging. I found it so engaging to watch, even though the action kind of plodded rather slow. But yeah, I can see it. I can see the popularity. But was it worth the follow-up movie being the biggest of all time in Japan? As I said, we'll talk about that a bit later. Okay. So let's revisit a story we've talked about on and off. And it's Sony. Or more specifically, the proposed acquisition of Crunchyroll into the Sony fold. And seemingly it's hit a snag. According to the website theinformation.com, the US Justice Department is going to do an antitrust review of the proposed acquisition
Well, it's
of
doing an
Crunchyroll.
extension. It's extending its review that it's already doing. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and but that's an interesting sign. According to the reports, they're reviewing the deal to see if it would give Japanese animation studios fewer options to distribute shows in the US, and that this could take a little. This will delay the deal,
Yeah, they
seemingly.
said by several months, and depending on how that goes, right, it could potentially kill it, depending if time is money, right?
Hmm. So this is a interesting development. We were all like, we talked at length about this when it was first announced. Well, we talked about it ad nauseum at various points in the last 6 months. I'd say. I know we
Yeah.
brought it up briefly. I think towards the end of summer or early fall, and then when the deal happened was announced just before the new year, or in December, I think it was. We talked about it ad nauseum. Like Sony's always a fascinating company to talk about in these contexts. But did anyone seriously think that, like, as much as many of us did not like the deal, did we seriously think that the Justice Department would do an extended antitrust investigation?
I
I
did not
think
expect it.
They
I
might have.
think it depends though, because right, we've had a change of administration and stuff like that. So I think some of that comes into play too, of course.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is gonna be one of those
So they're
litmus tests for the Biden administration, right? I
well,
mean,
they're taking a look at a few other deals, I think, as well and stuff like that. But some of the ones that were there before, unfortunately, went through. Like I know Microsoft's acquisition of ZeniMax, which had Bethesda and all those other studios, went through, and they announced that, and they said, "Hey, the deal is done."
Okay, and maybe this is an apples and oranges comparison, the whole Bethesda Microsoft thing, and this. What could have been the snag then? What's
It depends
what
because
type of
that one
monopoly?
was started earlier, didn't it? So I think some of it's just timing and stuff like that. And then the other thing we had talked about it before, some of the things in the article about them arguing, like the company, Sony and them are arguing the Justice Department not to consider anime a distinct market from the broader range of adult animation. And also talking about Netflix and about Amazon and all that other stuff. But it's interesting that they're taking a look at it from that angle because usually they look at from a more broader scope in my mind. That's why I figured it was just going to be rubber stamped. So it's interesting to see them take a little more look even at something more niche. I know it's definitely gained popularity. We've seen the money pouring in, but it's still to a greater degree niche compared to say Netflix, Disney Plus, and so on and so forth, and Hulu.
Yeah, that's one aspect. The one that grabs me is sticking up for foreign studios. Like because a lot of these reports kind of bring up the whole idea that they're seeing if it would limit the options for studios to promote market their works, because it would be because seemingly could just funnel into one major thing.
I guess the question is, how serious are they about that, right? You can say it, but we'll see what happens when a decision is made, right? How seriously they thought on that angle too, right? But it is something nice if that is true.
It's yeah, I
And
think
they truly believe in the free market, right?
like I have trouble thinking of it as a real litmus test for the Biden administration, just for reference, Mo. And that's not like it's interesting, but I think I just know they have bigger issues to deal with at the moment. But like I mean, I haven't looked at this as fresh as maybe I should.
And remember, it's like they talk about previous administration too, Mike, because remember AT&T and Time Warner when they were merging, and the Trump administration went after, and that was a 2 year fight, and that was big dollars going back and forth. So this isn't as big, so I'm not sure it's going to be the same thing, but we'll see what happens, whether they decide to let go or, as they say, they decide to sue to say that this deal should not happen and stuff like that. And they've talked about taking extended probes at other things. They were talking about Salesforce's plan to acquire Slack and stuff like that. So definitely on the tech side, I think they're going to be looking at things with a more closely.
Well, I'm just more confused as to what's like who's this benefiting in the US to try and stop such a deal? Because all the reports always talk about defending Japanese studios. That's the impression I get. But usually something like this would be I would have thought would have been launched in relation to, well, we have to defend an American entity of some sort. Or is it the fact that because we're talking about an American entity being bought? Because Crunchyroll is an American entity. Is that what is that part? Is that what it is?
As they say, your guess is as good as ours, right? It's like, who knows? Maybe they're just dotting the I's and crossing their T's, as they say. But
Yeah. So that's what has me a little bit confused about this. And from the outset, many of us, like we said, the anime world isn't a huge world, especially when you look in comparison to other foreign popular culture type things. I mean, Bollywood is, I'm pretty sure, much bigger. Pretty sure a lot of foreign entertainment forms would be way popular than anime. Asian movie, just even within Asian entertainment, I would have think anime hasn't gotten to that level, or maybe that's what it is because it's growing enough.
But I'm sure some of the arguments too, we've talked about Netflix and we've talked about Amazon, but especially as we've talked about Netflix, they've definitely been bullish on the live action Japanese properties and the Japanese anime side and stuff like that, and funding them and to compete with the big boys. As we say, this merger does make sense and stuff like that. And we've seen from season to season, all the shows, there might be a few trickling to Sentai in that, but for the most part, it's ping ponging between Crunchyroll and Funimation. Like I saw for the spring season, Crunchyroll got more of the series than Funimation did. But the other thing I noticed too, funny enough, was Megalobox, the second season. It didn't actually isn't going to be streaming on Crunchyroll, and it doesn't look like Viz got the license. It looks like it was
Really?
Funimation because Funimation is doing the streaming for it. So that'll be an interesting one because Viz dubbed that at Bang Zoom and they released it, and it looks like Viz is just giving up the ghost on the anime side again because it feels like some years they're interested and it looks like they're more interested in manga again.
And maybe that's part at the like things like that. That's catching the attention of the Justice Department. I mean, let me double back for a couple seconds here and just acknowledge anime, manga. It may not be big, but it's certainly ripe for growth right now in terms of options, in terms of entertainment options. It's a growth industry, I think is the popular phrase. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think so.
So
And we
I don't
talked
know.
about streaming too, right? How that's where all the eyeballs are and stuff like that. It isn't about physical media or watching on the TV. It's about streaming it from your computer or whatever screen you have and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So it's maybe some of them realizing this is where people are going and stuff like that. So we need to take a closer look maybe at these streaming services or
Right. Once again,
where.
coming back down to my thought on it's a growth industry, it's a growth segment within streaming now, right?
Mhm.
So I guess that's the impetus for what's going on. But still has me boggled as to this wouldn't be happening unless it's of like real concern to American entities. So it still confuses me just a little bit. And this comes back down to, my own simple mind, I suppose. But I don't know. You guys have any other thoughts? Like just randomly on all of this. Do you guys have other thoughts?
I
I honestly
miss.
didn't think they'd pursue it. Like this came as a surprise, really, because I always just had this notion that it's an anime company, it's an anime acquisition. Like, who cares about that in the grand scheme of things? So, like, it's just my general mindset because I feel like there would be more important monopolies they would chase after when it comes to these things. But you know what? I don't mind because, as we all like to stress, monopolies are never good.
Geoff?
I know it would have stoked the fire of the fandom wars far into the future, but I kind of like the simplicity of a few years ago, where it was like Crunchyroll saying, "You know what? We're gonna take care of most of the subs, and Funimation over there is gonna take care of most of the dubs, and we're gonna be separate but friends." That seemed like, again, I don't, the it could have ignited the sub versus dub wars into a horrible skirmish that would have lasted decades, but at least it was kind of simple. There was an element of, we're friends, we understand that we're going to compete for certain licenses, but, this is what most of our fans, respectively seem to be into. So we might as well just lean into that. And that seemed kind of organic and nice. And if Verve was in Canada, that probably would have led me to pick up a subscription to that. But then they stopped that, and now we're here.
Yeah, the partnership ended, but now resources are being brought back together, whether individual employees on both sides like it or not. That's seemingly what could happen.
And you know what I was thinking about too is the other thing they look at is dollars and cents because this is the $1.2 billion. So that's kind of like you're playing in the big leagues. This isn't like the hundreds of millions that Sony paid for Funimation. So you can tell that the market capital and everything is just growing at such a ridiculous rate. And that's not proposed money, that's real money on the table. So some of that probably plays a factor too.
So we go all woot. So it caught the attention of the Justice Department
Because that kind
because
of
it went
tells
all
you,
Wu
it's
Tang.
like, okay, if they're valuing this sector at that amount of money and we take a look at that sector, so it's kind of probably they're taking a look at that sector now that this has caught their attention. So they want an extra look.
Dollar bill, y'all, right? I mean, because of the amount of money involved in all of this, that's probably what grabs their attention.
Well,
Because,
apart.
I mean, okay. As I said, still a fascinating story. After, well, when did we last talk about it? Almost 3 months ago now, right? When the deal was signed.
So I think still the end goal is that the deal goes through in the end. Because if they let the Microsoft Bethesda thing go through, they'd let, and even though it was previous administration, AT&T, Time Warner, given everything on this one, it'll probably happen. It's just going to be a longer process.
Yeah, I tend to
And
agree.
whether Sony and Time Warner are willing to go along for the ride, as they say, because
Yeah.
things can still fall apart, right? If it takes too long.
Mhm. I mean, I'm of the agreement because when, yeah, just because of the sheer amount, like it's not chump change. I get it. It's not chump change. The 1.2 bill, but it isn't like we're talking in comparison to other versions of this. Not to say there have been, but other acquisitions and mergers that we've heard about. This is still small. We get it with in terms of anime, but it's small. Yeah, we get anime is still a growth industry, but in the grand scheme, it's well. There's a reason why things have kind of consolidated the way they have.
Guess we could always joke that there's still probably more opportunities for them there than in Canada's telecom industry.
Huh.
Don't know if we want to go there.
Let's not.
That's another. And if you kept up with the Canadian news, you'll know where that reference just came in. So this is a story, as I said, we'll just continue to keep up with because, well, in any event, even if we're not trying to keep up, someone will let us know anyway. But as I said, we'll probably hear about this when the investigation is over and the deal closes. That's my guess. And hey, prove me wrong. All right, let's take the break. When we come back, the Japan America Society of Dallas and Fort Worth. We mentioned their online event that would have happened. Well, we mentioned it last episode, and that was going to happen the day after St. Patrick's Day on March 18th. It came and went. The YouTube video is up. We watched it, or at least 3 of us did. And we'll fill in the other 2 on the whole details and talk at length about that when we get back. It's the Anime Roundtable on the Six Talk Podcast Network.
Hey folks, my name is Brett and I'm one of the hosts of Skeleton House, an audio-only Let's Play podcast where my 2 friends Jess...
What is happening? Oh my god!
...and Steve...
Even he looks spooked.
...play through video games, and I edit them, add context, and act as your eyeballs. Also, we have a cat. Come check us out at skeletonhouse.buzzsprout.com or look up Skeleton House on your favorite podcast app. Or your least favorite podcast app. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life.
And the podcast now continues. Nicolas, Austin, Ing, Sharmarke, Greig, around the virtual table with you. In front of a virtual audience, thanks for listening, and online via the Six Talk Podcast Network. Official podcast, Anime North. Just turned on the lights again. Earth Hour is over. Earth Hour was going on while we were starting to tape this. Went from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. It is well after 9:30 now. We're not going to give the actual time as we're taping this, are we?
Well, it depends because I think they said Earth Hour, it was based 8:30 to 9:30 on your local time and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just say we had bad local timing.
Well, yeah, that too. Well, there's a lot of things that are bad timing here. Okay. So we mentioned we'd be talking about this a couple weeks ago, or just before the break, but we mentioned it a couple weeks ago, last episode. The Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth, always good for material whenever they do an online event. I think one of the first events we saw there was late last year. I think Matt Alt and Hiroko Yoda appeared in one of their online events.
Correct.
Forgot. Well, I forgot what was the exact theme. I'd have to look it up again. Although I know for some strange reason, Hiroko Yoda did a whole lecture on the term kawaii in 5 minutes or less.
And I think it had to do that with the kawaii and pop culture in general and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they definitely gave a very good explanation. I think they also talked about yokai there as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, yokai. Yeah, it's a thing these days. Okay, but March 18th, the Japan America Society at Dallas Fort Worth, they did a really interesting panel discussion about Japanese pop culture's response to COVID-19. That was the exact title they used. In it, Roland Keltz, Seo Nakajima, Aki Nakanishi, and Bill Sutzi, which I may have pronounced wrong, so I apologize to Mr. Sutzi, said it again, did a little discussion on said topic. And all of it was really fascinating. If you give yourself the chance, we will put the link up to the YouTube replay of the panel. And do yourself a favor, give yourself about the hour 20 minutes it is to hear them out, because I think I personally thought it was a fascinating little discussion. Although, and this is probably the easy way to start that discussion, at least the way we'll look at it, the impetus of the talk centers on this theme to me. And you thought the pandemic of the last year was isolating. Try being Japan between the 1630s and 1850s. That's sort of the initial takeaway I get from watching the presentation, because the isolationist period, the 2 centuries plus centuries of isolation that was forced on the country, self-imposed, kind of forced some interesting things for Japan. It made Japan, in the words of Nakanishi, both curious of the outside world and uniquely creative in their own ways to entertain and express themselves.
And then once they were open, how that then went to the broader world and stuff like that. And I think it was the interesting thought of we're in this lockdown and stuff like that. And then with the technological tools we have now, how that spreads and changes the things that come out of that isolation and stuff like that. Because we saw ukiyo-e and stuff like that and other art forms go to Western places. They talked about the Austrian World's Fair and stuff like that. And some of it was just stuff you would see in normal everyday life in Japan, some of this stuff. And then it turned into high art or high fashion or something to that effect, or even the gardens and stuff like that, where remember in Japan, the gardens were not for the general commoners exactly, but then it became, when it went to the West, more for people to stroll around leisurely and stuff like that and take in this calmness.
There's a weird opposite effects. Yes, you talk for a couple seconds about how everyday pop items for its time, like ukiyo-e, became high class as it became more popular overseas. And then, ironically, the Japanese gardens, Zen gardens, kind of ended up going the other way around, from high class domestically to public spaces. outside of Japan. There's a certain paradox or irony in all of that. But as I said, the whole it's an interesting line. I mean, the whole impetus just is an interesting starting point. Yeah, we're isolated, but like there's a degree of isolation now, but there's a degree of connectivity, and that wasn't there when the 2 centuries happened there in Japan in the 1600s.
And we have to remember too, though, it's like they definitely were quite isolated, but it wasn't complete, because as we remember, there was one open port and they could only stay there for the foreign merchants. And usually it was with the Portuguese and the Dutch that were allowed in that one port. And it was a very limited exchange and stuff like that.
I mean, there's a lot to cover in the what the three in what Nakanishi, Nakajima, and Celts all said. And they all take different angles. I think Nakanishi kind of harped on the theme of reciprocal essence of cultural evolution. I remember writing that down. I took notes just for reference. Felt like a university student,
And I think
which meant I was failing. Sorry, Jay.
I was thinking as well for Nakanishi that he was talking about traditional arts evolving with the times and stuff like that. And he said he could talk on many things, but the interesting ones that caught my attention was kabuki and stuff like that, where there weren't really many things being streamed online and stuff like that. But then because of that, people in their 40s that were the younger part of the kabuki crowd that were doing kabuki, and some of them from long lineages, were starting to bring some of this stuff online, and more people were able to see it and experience in a way they hadn't before and gain new fans and stuff like that.
In some
And
ways,
Amazon got involved, he was saying, and they were going to do something with Kabuki and with what they had done, maybe online. I forget what program they were going to call it, but it was
yeah.
going to involve some Kabuki shows,
Well,
which
yeah,
hasn't been done before.
I think admittedly we might be getting too far ahead of ourselves because that's sort of how Japan is sort of adapting right now. Not really, like
And the other thing
there's a
was
certain
this.
because when each of these guys when each of them spoke, they set up their own contexts to the
Mhm.
situation, right? And I think this is more that like when we talk about what Kabuki is doing now, that sounds more of a a reaction to the present situation.
And even Sumo, I think he said the same thing, where they were trying to find out who is our core audience, who isn't the people that aren't the people just bringing people like because we need something for us to do on our business meeting or something like that, or to go out and drink, or where who between the hardcore and the fair weather fans. And one of them was like, remember he showed on his screen the phone app at the
I
Sumo
know.
Association and the different things, and you could trade virtual cards and all that. But only some of them you could get by you had to actually go to the sumo matches and stuff like that. And they said at the moment, I think they're at 50% capacity is allowed in the sumo matches
Yeah, but
to
as I
help,
said,
I
that's
guess, which is an
as I said,
interesting.
yeah, it's an interesting point, but as I said, that's more at the that came those 2 points came up more at the end. So as I said, we kind of got ahead of ourselves on that. Although I want to come back to the sumo point a bit later on because there's something like
I
it
think
kind of
it's
pairs into
okay because
something
it's
else.
more on the non-anime stuff and stuff like that, and more of the general pop culture and stuff. That's why
Hmm.
I thought I'd bring them in.
Okay, well, it's fair. Although, with NFT things like NBA Top Shot the last little while and non-fungible tokens. I think that's the term that's been using. It would be interesting. I would have found it interesting to see what would happen if sumo kind of tried to go that route. But then we're talking about pulling it into cultures that sometimes maybe Japan itself would loathe to be pulled into because in some ways like that this is part of the one of the more bottom line statements from it. Japan like Japan has a bit of a reputation of being pulled into present time in some ways, kicking and screaming in terms of the way it thinks, right?
Depends on the industry too and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Because
yeah.
just to jump ahead of us, just a bit talking about the animation industry. We were talking about how they were doing well and stuff like that. And they were talking about that at the end. They said, well, some of that helped from 311, unfortunately, where they did have issues. So they had already had some of those bumps along the way to prepare for something like this. And then they had many freelancers. So that was another factor that helped them for doing virtual work and stuff like that, and being able to do things where they're not all in the same room. And then it was different moving parts, as we've talked before, had to function differently. Like, for example, voice acting and stuff like that, because usually they were always in the same room before.
Yeah, as I said, there's once again there's that paradox I mentioned, right? Yeah, okay, let's go back for a couple seconds here. In some ways, doing anime productions, and I guess to a degree manga productions, it doesn't as much like you could pivot away from in person interaction. Like the pivot could be a little bit is a little easier, and like you just brought up, James. There was a lull in the industry after the Great East Japan earthquake 10 years ago. So that lull, was the industry trying to just figure itself out after what happened, and then
And
there was
then
a
we
spike,
saw
and then
the
and then there's a
takeoff,
spike
as
point.
we saw from one of those charts from
Inflect
Rolling Celts. And
yeah, I think the word was inflection point. Which is a common phrase I'm hearing these days, and when it comes to stocks.
and
So,
then Mr. Celts had a few other things, as you said, where he was talking about um, the VTubers, and we had talked much about that and stuff like that, and how some of that is creating communities and bringing people together in different ways, since
mhm.
there isn't any a lot of in-person events and stuff like that.
Yeah. So as I said, it's just adapted because it's already had its disaster. I mean, okay, let's just an analogy, and people may agree or disagree with me on this one, and it's sort of COVID related too. How bad has COVID hit in Africa? Because I've read like some articles that suggest, in some ways, because of the various plagues that they've dealt with over the last decade or so, the management may not be nearly as bad there as it has been in other parts of the world. And maybe that's in a bit of an extreme case, but I try and kind of juxtapose it to what's happened in Japan. They've had their disaster in 311. Through the last decade, they've learned to be nimble, so to speak, and pivot. So when the pandemic happened, they basically said, "Hold my sake." But basically they knew how to handle this.
I think that there's a lot about Japan that made them kind of very well suited to be able to ride this wave. If you look at sort of their history of being adaptable and tenacious, like even though they're slow to adopt change, even if the change has to happen rapidly, uh, they have a lot of, I guess, defenses. It's a culture that wears masks all the time when you have a common cold. So telling everyone, hey, everyone has or maybe has a common cold, you just don't know it. So please wear masks. And everyone's like, okay, sure. To the point where, you had the Super Nintendo Land opening and all the dancers are out there wearing the masks, and it's kind of just normal. Like they so, readily adapted and, made it just part of their life like it was nothing. Compared to the U.S. when people are screaming and tearing down walls because they have to wear a mask inside Walmart for 3 minutes.
Yeah, equating it to a violation of their personal rights.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that goes so, with Japan's, collectivism to some degree, right? Like, you know, they're all in this together, that sort of resonates throughout so many parts of Japanese culture. but especially kind of the modern era. And I'm sure people would argue the pros and cons of that, but I think that that's been a big part of their reason, or of their ability to adapt to all of this. And then if you look at like the VTuber, phenomenon, how much have anime fans throughout different series that we've watched been introduced like to concepts such as neets and hikikomoris? Like there's already not a great culture, but there was existing cultures in the past of people who were shut in and didn't really want to leave their house.
Hold my sake. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, that's what it is, right?
And like even like if you look back to their interactions with the outside world, I'm sure Japan is missing their international tourism, but you know they definitely want their international tourism back, but they can also take it and leave it. They can they can wait. There's plenty of
Oh,
Japanese people to
they
have
said it'll
tourism.
come back, didn't they, Geoff? Oh.
Yeah.
Now there's that belief, and they just got to make sure to keep the demand.
And
To
that,
that,
I guess, a lot of animators, they talked about how it used to be we had a lot of different imaginative places we couldn't visit, but a lot of directors, and of course they mentioned Your Name and many others, Makoto
Shinkai,
Shinkai,
yeah.
that it's based in reality, that you can visit a lot of these places, and that's what some people are doing. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets too much, because we've heard many places where they said, you could just please not leave any garbage, and please don't do anything disrespectful.
the for better, there's your for better or worse right there.
Mm.
It's yeah, and I guess just to develop that point just for a couple seconds, it's more like because of the evolution of what's been depicted in anime, 70s, 80s, you saw giant mechs, space operas set in fantasy worlds or space worlds, not realistic places. But in recent years, the 90s, the aughts, the 2010s, the settings have been more have been more true to life, slice of life, right? The
Mm.
high school
I would
places that would actually exist uh, were popular settings, and I start to like, to me, I think I don't know exactly when that started, but I started to notice it, saying something like some Studio Ghibli works. I keep mentioning my love for ocean waves, and I know there was a feature in the DVDs or Blu-rays that talked about the real settings used in the production of that movie. So once again, drawing the parallels between Shinkai and Miyazaki, although Ocean Waves was not a Miyazaki film, but the parallels between comics and Studio Ghibli, you have those instances. And yes, anime tourism is the thing. I kind of laughed when I heard the name Anime Pilgrimage 88. I laughed out loud when I heard
That was a good
that
one.
term brought up by Roland Kelts, because that's quickly a play on the Shikoku pilgrimage. If anybody knows about that, you guys know about that, right? The Shikoku pilgrimage, which is considered one of the great religious passages in Japan, which is a travel to 88 shrines, and I forgot which island, but it's it's considered a very spiritual journey should one ever undertake it in any form. And they don't have to necessarily find all 88 shrines in one go. Like people just go like take in a few at a time, but it's considered quite the thing to do.
For reasons that we might touch on later, I'm really curious what the criteria was for selecting those 88 points.
I guess that's worth looking up sometime.
It's part of the journey, right?
That's part of. Thank you. Way to go. Well said. So Nakanishi and Celts always. I know that their key bottom line points was always about how isolationism helped flourish their own pop culture or their own native culture, so to speak.
And how they transformed once they went abroad and stuff like that. And we've
Mm-hmm.
heard that many times before, but it's kind of that interest they said of how it parallels to COVID times, which you didn't really think. And you're like, that I can see that.
There's a parallel in one way, but obviously there's a deviation that happens, but that's more because of the times we're in.
No, of course.
Because the technology we have today obviously did not exist during the 17th, 18th century, right? So there's a degree of isolationism in some ways, but there's a unique type of connectivity that comes in, that presents itself, and becomes a bit of a catalyst for another form. That's sort of what's happened here, right? Pandemic was a different type of cutoff, but anime and manga have strangely done well. And that sort of comes back to our discussion last episode when ICV2 talked to those executives from Viz and Seven Seas and DJ Melky.
No, it was Yen Press. Kurt Hassler was the one
that
talking
was in the Seven Seas. So, geez. Way to steal the thunder from my punchline there. Okay. But this is a kind of an offshoot, like an extension of all of that. This industry. And what is it? Like Keltz brought up the fact that Japan has 11 of the 25 highest grossing media franchises of all time. Yeah. Pokemon, Hello Kitty, Winnie the Pooh, Mickey Mouse, Star Wars, and how do you pronounce it?
Anpan Man.
Anpan Man.
Being
the top 6.
I
had heard, I'd seen that one, and that one's the interesting one. And I think, Geoff, you had mentioned it in conversation as well.
It's
and
ridiculous to me.
I think it's not in English-speaking places. I think it's in other places that it definitely has its viewers, as you said, maybe in other parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia, maybe even in some Spanish-speaking and maybe even in some Arab regions. You never know.
Yeah,
because it could be localized.
It is one of those series that could be localized into the Middle Eastern markets that a lot of teenager-focused anime can't, because if anyone doesn't know, Anpan Man is essentially a preschool show, which is partly why I'm kind of flabbergasted that it made it into that top 6 list. Like, that's imagining, like, I'm dating myself, but like Naughty or like Arthur being the top 10. Arthur might be skewing too old, actually, more like Caillou or Teletubbies.
Oh,
Caillou to a lot of people is French for punch in the mouth.
Like,
I'm sorry,
people age out of Anpan Man at like age 5, to be honest. Like at sort of, that would be on the old end. I mean, good for it, like, but it's surprising that it's on that list. But that list also made me think about what you were talking about just a few minutes ago, Mike, about the anime tourism and this kind of came up at the end of the talk as well, but the kind of capital that anime pop culture has that is only kind of rivaled by the USA. Like, when I think about when COVID ends, the places I want to go, now that the orange one is gone, I kind of like to go to the US again. And Japan is probably number 1 on my list. And then the other places are just places that I have friends or have been before. But, the top 2 are probably Japan and the US. Not necessarily connected solely to, media franchises. But, I think that there's an interesting power there that doesn't exist in other countries, at least to the same scale. Yeah. Like at the end of the talk there, someone brought up like, China's expanding its animation and manga. And what about, South Korea and India? And yes, I think all of these countries are definitely ramping up, worldwide appeal and production, but I don't see them closing in on Japan and the US when it comes to those things.
My thought was, okay, the appeal, like, yeah, it comes back down. Like, it had me thinking about, in some ways, Korea, China, Like they're playing catch up in one way and really try, and some of it's even government sponsored, the promotion of those soft powers, soft culture, right? And some are really trying to press it harder than others, the governments. So I mean,
K-pop
yeah,
is
but
remarkably successful.
yeah,
And that was what I was going to bring up. But
and
I
and
think,
and then I'll let you speak. Sorry, James.
go ahead.
It's more of a case of, okay, well, where was Japan's initial appeal? It felt more organic. It wasn't like no real, like it wasn't highly marketed. It's just people stumbled on it and really loved it, and then that's where it really started to take off, because the people who stumbled on it and loved it really either want to share it or buy it all themselves and keep it
As
all to
Kelt
themselves, one
said,
or
it
the
was
other.
demand driven,
Mhm.
unlike the others. It wasn't a fake demand. It was
It
actually
wasn't
demand.
that's the word. It wasn't artificial, which comes back down, and comes back down to one part of our conversation with Matt Alt. Probably the issue, one of the bigger issues with the Cool Japan initiative. It's trying to keep it more government promoted, when that's not how we got there. Okay, now back. All right, go ahead, James.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The Celts point about how it was demand driven and stuff like that. And then how, when these governments and different things are trying to reach out and stuff like that, some find more success than others. And I think they mentioned K-pop is one of the things where K-pop has had better success now than J-pop, and J-pop is just okay and fine with just settling for the domestic market, while K-pop is actually going over to LA, working with those producers and stuff like that, and then bringing stuff back to Seoul and stuff like that, and having that dialogue back and forth so that they can reach all the dance halls across the world. Whereas Celts and a few of the others were, well, I think it was actually Celts specifically said that the J-pop, it's just, oh, we're just going to be good enough with gang signing, someone will sing at karaoke.
And once again, it ends up not necessarily counting on it, but somebody else finding it organically and then loving it in their own way. Whereas, yeah, once you said in Korea, it was just more like the popularity happened, but boy, it just sounded all forced, or at least pursued. I think that's the better word. It was pursued specifically. But it's that's sort of the that could be where the fork in the road, so to speak, is about to happen. Because I think in many respects, like part of the discussion was looking into the crystal ball past COVID times, past the pandemic, right?
And
And
sorry.
go ahead, Geoff.
Yeah, and
Maybe I'll add to that.
I think that like near the end of the talk there, I think it was maybe Celts who led this discussion. One of the things that really fascinated me was this, and we've talked about it. I think we've talked about it, or at least the podcast has, is that idea of how Japan or how Japanese are these series going to be moving forward, and are the more Japanese focused series going to be the ones that are incredibly popular? One quote that someone said is that if you're in Brazil, Goku is Brazilian. If you're in the U.S., he's American. And I'm looking at a lot of some of these overseas hits. And a lot of them, if you look at Dragon Ball or Saint Seiya or One Piece, uh, there's not much. I mean, Dragon Ball, there's some Japanese elements there, but it is a fictional setting. And there's Japanese elements even in something like Pokemon. But, it is this sort of just Japanese enough, but just universal enough that it has this appeal, or it can easily find this appeal outside of Japan. And I'm really curious if there is going to be, this move to more Japanese focus, and if that's going to have an impact on sort of the success of future series. I'm still kind of waiting to see what happens with Demon Slayer as far as a North American phenomenon kind of effect. And there's of course series yet to come. And I think that this is also what might hold China back, in the sense that, if from what I've seen of China's animation output, it has been very pandering to Chinese sensibilities, where Japan has been, their series are always Japanese and with the Japanese spirit, but aesthetically there's been more variety there from what I've seen.
The China thing will be interesting because in the end, the appeal to Chinese sensibilities, we are talking 1 billion plus. We are
Yeah.
talking probably the better part of the quarter of the world's population. That's not chump change.
And they already have very strict guidelines as is, so.
No ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. Actually, it was Celts you were thinking of, I believe, Geoff. And that was the interesting thing, too. I think Nakajima and Celts had some interesting back and forth on that part, talking about, well, Celts especially, he's talked about Oprah, remember? And he said, remember, they had the interview with Harry and that between
And
Oprah, and he
Meghan.
had to explain to people
Yeah.
who Oprah was in Japan because they didn't know who Oprah was. But people here, it's like, you know who Oprah is. And then, as they said, Goku is Goku, Sailor Moon is Sailor Moon. Like, it transitions through things you don't really have to explain and stuff like that. And that was the thing I didn't think about, that you said that if they're too Japanese and stuff like that, which is interesting because remember he said the tribes analogy, where it's like, this is the one that wants the traditional animation and as much Japanese. This is the one that probably will do the cross promotions and stuff like that and doesn't mind the CG and stuff like that.
And
So
even
it'll be the casual consumer and stuff like that.
and even that initial discussion on how the Japanese audience is splitting over co-productions, like that's, I think, a really interesting topic to me. Like, I imagine something like Cannon Busters wouldn't do well in Japan. I'm even curious about something, like Great Pretender, which is relatively, completely Japanese made, but or at least a high percentage, but has such an international focus to the story. Um, and there's been co-productions, since almost the beginning of animation. But the talk that there's been more of it. There's been more discussions. There's more willingness to talk to France and the U.S. and probably other countries around the world about co-productions, and the fact that there's going to be anime fans that aren't a fan of anything that isn't what they are now considering pure anime, which is so interesting to me, because even a couple years ago, if you go to Japan and talk to Japanese people, anything animation is called anime. They would call Powerpuff Girls anime, like Simpsons would be anime. But it seems like it's finally changing, almost to skew more to how North Americans would consider it, where, only animation made in Japan and Japanese voice acted is anime, and things like the original Teen Titans and Avatar are anime inspired, but it must be Japanese in order to be anime. And then where does that leave something that is a co-production? Your
They
Cyber
say it's
Sixes
all
and
a muddled soup, right, Jeff? As long as we enjoy and stuff like that, I
yeah,
think that's what counts.
that's my opinion. But I'm I love Oban Star
Well,
Racer, Cyber Six. Co-productions are some of my favorites. But I'm really curious about how the Japanese audience is going to take it, and if that will end up you know ceasing the production. Like, hopefully things like Netflix keep this alive, even if you never see it in your animates or other Japanese retailers. Like, you're not going to see huge merchandising pulls or pushes, but I desperately want to see these kind of collaborations continue.
and I think
See,
they talked about that with Netflix too in the live action Japanese, that they're looking at more of that again, like we had talked about before. They want to use and be authentic, and that Toho, they want to take some of their sound stages and use the people that probably normally would be doing stuff for TV and that, and use it for streaming and bring it to the world, which is interesting.
just to backtrack just for a couple seconds, so so the listeners have a sense of the concepts and the thoughts that maybe Celts expressed, just to clear it up, one of Keltz's predictions is that fandom will divide itself. There'll be a bit of a schism in fandom. Some hardcore devotees looking for a more pure anime, as Geoff just mentioned, and that's the term that was actually used, Japanese all the way. And then there'll be another segment of fandom, a softer audience who will be okay with the hybrid and co-produced anime. That's the key thing. When I hear those terms, when I hear those possible divisions, it sort of made me think about everything that happened to I forgot the translator's name. We talked about it.
Caleb
Cook, yes.
Caleb Cook, yes.
And what he was going through, because in many respects, I'm thinking that's the type of schism he faced. He faced that hardcore devotee schism. He faced those hardcore fans who got on his case. Like that's the issue. That's the issue I'm having when I hear those terms. Like that's what I start to think about. And pair up that thought with how Nakajima and Nakanishi ultimately look into their versions of the crystal ball in 5 years. Well, it hasn't been that bad. I mean, one thing that it might have done, that COVID times have done, or in recent years have done, is put Japan more accepting of the subscription economy, which was a new term for me, but I get it, right? So Japan has more gotten into it, but I think it's Nakanishi that kind of made an interesting point towards the end. The big issue is Japan, in some ways, as time goes, has to redefine itself. And dealing with the idea of stirring the pot is something that Japan has historically had its issues with. But that's sort of what it needs to do. And the problem is, in many respects, it's going, so to speak, kicking and screaming because it's an aging population and it's a shrinking, and ultimately it's going to be one that shrinks. It's that idea, or it's that concept that's forced the industry to look outside of its borders because their own domestic market is shrinking, or is in the position to shrink in the next number of decades. But it's out there. It's beyond their borders. And they have to compete, and they have to compete for it now. Or China, Korea, Taiwan, India, they'll take it instead. But they have a leg up because of the organic grown fandom that was nurtured and could be passed on through generations.
And the fact that Japan is still seen as a safe, place to visit, that was mentioned in that tourism bit. There's, when you're looking at Japanese culture and I guess pop culture as well, there's kind of something for everyone. I sound like I'm advertising like it's Disney or something, but it does have a lot to offer and is relatively easily accessible, compared to a lot of these other countries. And I think that places like South Korea and Taiwan can probably start competing. I mean, Taiwan has a lot of political problems or challenges, not problems. But I think Japan is still kind of set up for success here, as difficult as it might be, with that aging population and the kicking and screaming. But, as with a lot of these issues, like if you look at, things like Osaka, the racism Osaka faced, that's definitely a problem. And
Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, just to clear that up.
Yeah, sorry. If you look at some of the difficulties or challenges she's had with racism, those are definitely huge problems and sort of betray a lot of issues Japan has in general. But I'm also thinking, like, I'm not sure if she would have had the amount of success and popularity she has if she came about 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think that a lot of the acceptance, despite the racism, a lot of the acceptance that she's having is because Japan is changing, and the young people in Japan, you know, are getting a little bit louder. There's been LGBT rights, small victories in Japan, but they're coming.
Well, I think this week they
Yeah,
announced the acceptance of some acceptance of same-sex marriages,
yeah.
if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
that's interesting. I know they were talking about. I was looking at a DVD for a Lupin special because Justin Savakis was writing something about homophobia in '90s anime because of one of the things they were working on, and one of the key points they said it was Ipsos read, and I think it was maybe 10 years ago. So we're talking 2011, 2012. They said 5% of the Japanese population said they knew someone in the LGBT or someone that was gay and stuff like that. And that's just unthinkable to think anywhere else in a lot of places back then. You know what I mean? But change does happen.
Hmm.
And hopefully it takes time, but it's moving positive directions. So
Yeah,
Japan
but
Japan is slow, but I think that with a lot of these things, you're going to see slow compared to other countries, but fast compared to the Japan of 20 years ago, for example.
fair point.
And it was interesting on the anime point, they said the thing with the aging population is that now the younger generation is starting to get into some of those positions and they're not really surprised when it's like, oh, the people outside really like anime or they like my manga or they like this thing. And they already know that's embraced so that they can give the artwork or whatever they're doing creatively a new lens, a new outlook, and maybe we'll see something different in the next few years, in the next 20, 25, 50 years
Hmm.
to redefine Japan.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part is we talk about the youth, but then we talk about the elder, like the older population. Let's go back to Demon Slayer for a couple seconds here. Remember, I mean, I think Nakajima hinted Demon Slayer held an appeal to older crowds too, because like yeah, we talked about the yokai themes, but there are some good universal themes that ended up resonating: protecting family, perseverance, suffering. But but it also had some parts in traditional Japanese folklore that helped its success.
Hmm.
Now, here's the question. Now here's a question that I know we can't definitively answer, but I'm wondering. But I want to see what people think. Once again, Demon Slayer, the movie, is the highest grossing film domestically in Japan all time in theaters. Is it because it's Demon Slayer, or was it because of pent up demand during the pandemic?
And they said they juiced it that it would be in more theaters and stuff like that. I forget what they called it, like kind of like a supercharger stuff going across all these theaters and stuff like that. But I think it was both, that it crossed all these generations, and then the thing that there wasn't much to see, it didn't have much competition, so everyone could go and have this communal experience. You know what I mean? Not like everyone in the seats, but still to a degree that we haven't seen in a long time.
And there's the hope now with its possible coming into North America. We can see some of that. Not like do not expect Demon Slayers to be gangbusters in a movie theater here in North America.
I think they loosened the restrictions when it started to come out and stuff like that. So there were
Oh,
definitely
there,
a
yeah.
lot more people in the theaters, a lot more options than what we'll probably have. We'll probably be in hazmat suits and like maybe one to a
Perfect
row.
storm. Maybe a perfect storm for Demon Slayer there. You know? But
It could
as I said,
also be. I was
Go
just going
ahead.
to say, it could also be a situation like Animal Crossing that released last March, where it would have been successful, but because of the pandemic, it just got an extra boost.
Oh wow, you just had to say Animal Crossing. There, that made news earlier this week too.
Oh,
Oh,
you're
because
talking
of the
about the
Sanrio
Sanrio
cards?
cards?
Yeah, the Sanrio cards.
So I heard they were at Best Buy. Were they at any other places in Canada? Because I know it was
It
an
was Best Buy,
exclusive in,
which means
well, it
they were
was in
gone.
Best Buy here, but I'm not sure if it's
Target in the States.
because in the States it was an exclusive, wasn't it? I think it was Target.
Target only, I think.
But you never
Oh,
know. It might have been more here than just Best Buy, but I know it was at Best Buy.
how much would you flip them for? Oh my goodness.
Well, I heard they were flipping Demon Slayer, what was it, cards or whatever that McDonald's was doing as a promotion. Remember that? It was just as bad as the Pokemon one in the
Oh
States.
boy.
Oh,
Okay.
really? Oh.
Well,
And that was for
anyway.
Happy Meals too, I believe.
hmm As I said, we didn't. As I said, we're basically anything we're talking about in all of this. We're scratching the surface about a lot of what was said, and then obviously it was very all jumbled, um, all jumbled thoughts from the panel. So if you want to see how it actually does flow, watch the video. We're gonna put a link to the YouTube presentation of this panel in the show notes.
But I think it
And
definitely covered more than just anime because I think that's another thing to think about, Mike, is that a lot of these ones that the Japan Foundation at different parts of North America, they did a lot of different things about manga and anime and J-pop and stuff. But sometimes they do the traditional arts. But they definitely, that one felt, and we're seeing more of them, that they're covering many more different facets, I feel, of Japanese culture, which is always fascinating to learn and stuff like that. And that's the thing I'm sure, as Geoff would agree, is going there yourself and stuff and experiencing all these different new things you never saw or dreamed of before, going seeing the rich cultural history like outside of a museum, going to a temple and stuff like that and feeling that environment.
mhm. Well, as I said, we'll put a link up. Geoff, you have anything to add?
No, I think that was a good way to put it. That I think that the there is a power of what they called anime tourism, but general tourism as well. And I think I've probably even mentioned this on the podcast before, but I would definitely recommend like even some of the mundane activities, like going to a mid-sized town. Seeing there's all those shots of shopping arcades and even regular malls and festivals. The individual festivals in different towns and cities, sort of going beyond the actual general
Touristy stuff.
locations, or
Just
yeah, or even like the anime tourism, to experiencing things that maybe you've seen characters experience in different series.
I guess that's why you make me think of one scene in Marmalade Boy years ago when I think his name was Michael. Funny enough, the character when he comes as an exchange student and he takes fascination with just going to a conveyor belt sushi place.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's that feeling. I think that's the type of feeling you're referring to.
There's a magic to convenience stores. Like they're famous, but like once you've kind of experienced them, there's convenience stores here are like pale in comparison. There's a whole vibe. Even grocery stores, they play music at certain times. And I think that those are the kind of things that I hope people do experience once people can travel to Japan again. But before people can travel to Japan, you're probably going to be able to access your local Japanese or Japanese Canadian / American cultural centers. And I would definitely advise any listeners to access those. I know, here in Canada, up in North York, we have the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. I haven't been, but Hamilton apparently has a wonderful cultural center there. Obviously, the talk we're referring to, that's Texas, right? Um,
Mhm. Japan America Society.
Yeah,
At
like
Dallas Fort Worth.
yeah, they mentioned that their facilities, I think more of I guess community center, Japan Foundation model kind of place. Um, there's I would definitely try to visit some of those places. As I guess a stopgap. I'm hoping those will open before tourism or borders open, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's my main recommendation there.
Mm-hmm. And I'll end off by okay. First of all, I'm gonna start by ending this part off by saying, couldn't you tell who watched the video and who didn't?
Definitely Kevin and Mo. They had a lot to say.
Yeah. Second, it's funny you mentioned Hamilton, Geoff, in terms of a Canadian, a Japanese Canadian cultural center. I'll take you at your word. I wasn't aware of one, but it's just funny you mentioned it because do you remember the story back in version 1? I told the story of Susan Tsuji, the woman who had Hello Japan, the Japanese show that once aired on City TV in their chin block. And yeah, now that I think about it, Hello Japan is probably a take on Hello Kitty. I told you she held the Canadian rights to a lot of NHK programming in the 80s and 90s. And probably most notably amongst that was the Kohaku Utakasen, the red and white show. And I mentioned for everything that aired, she aired Hello Japan on City TV, but she didn't air the Kohaku on it. Though the Kohaku Utakasen was presented as a tape delay show New Year's Day on CHCH TV, Hamilton. And I think it was like she went all from what I could gather, she went all out to get sponsors to help her with the airing of that every year. So it was a big thing for the Tsuji family when they did that until she passed away in 2000. But it was just you made me think of that. You made me think of her, and when the red and white show used to air on local TV here, you made me think of that. So thanks for that's not sarcastic, but thank you for helping me remember that. It was a good memory.
I'm glad.
So anyway, we did mention the Japan America Society. This video, we'll put it up. There was one other thing we did mention as well. The Japan Foundation New York on March 30th, which is Tuesday. Oh, wait, the day this episode goes up. Well, I'm sure you'll see the replay. They're going to continue their series as well on Japanese pop culture with an academic lean. And they're going to talk a little bit more at length about stage adaptations, 2.5D as they call it, stage adaptations of anime manga properties. So we'll put a link to that one more time, and for sure we'll put up the link to the replay when that eventually goes up. But there's another one to look forward to. And as I said, if you have the time, give yourself the time to watch all of these. Okay, before we go tonight, first of all, I'm loath to ask anyone on their
Actually, I was gonna say there was one thing I was gonna mention, and remember
okay,
I told you about it, Mike. Was if they want to do an online calendars, the Ace Attorney online orchestra supposedly happening April 10th, I believe, and you can get tickets for that. They're doing it for people outside Japan, which is interesting.
That's interesting.
And that one I believe they're doing from Japan, but it's interesting. I don't think that they're showing it in Japan and in certain places in Asia. It's mostly outside of Asia that they're showing it, and it's paid though, so you have to pay for an online ticket, and then you watch the stream, and that's happening on Saturday, April 10th. They said.
Hey, 2 days before I can get a haircut again, and probably
I think they said the ticket price is set at $42, but I'm not sure if that's American or not. It probably is American.
Probably is. It's too rich for my blood, I admit. But there are fans.
Well,
Okay.
it's the best we can do because remember, we've had many concerts pass through Toronto and stuff like that, and many of us have enjoyed those video game concerts over the years. So it's
Oh yeah,
nice to have
worth
something
mentioning,
out
like
there.
Play and Final Fantasy concert, and yeah, I get it. Video games live, those things.
Correct.
Okay. Do we want to mention just some items in brief, just a quick item in brief, just for a reaction, just to see before we end off tonight? Like, two things caught my attention, I will say, and they're all both live action type stories. Word came down this week that the Cowboy Bebop live action has finished taping. I didn't even know they restarted.
I
One of
thought
the
they
minor stars.
mentioned, didn't they? I
Yeah, it
thought
was
they
mentioned.
mentioned minor that they had restarted because
Okay.
the main guy, remember, had
Yeah,
healed up and stuff like that, and they gave
John
him the
Cho.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it was lost on me, and so they finished it up, and I'd be curious to watch it for probably cynical reasons. I think people say they'll watch it for cynical reasons. I think it's like the waiting for the NASCAR crash.
I think people are more confident about this than they were something like Death Note. I haven't seen quite as many detractors for Cowboy Bebop as compared to a lot of the other Western live action series that have
Same
been
here.
created.
I think they just I think also they're just having fun with it too. Remember, the only other promo we've seen of it is the rest of the crew meeting Ein for the first time.
And
I
didn't
thought that
they
was a
have
great promo.
Watanabe like has been involved in stuff like
Yeah.
that?
Yes,
It's
I think I've
more
heard that.
involved for
Yes.
the future too. They said so. That's
Yeah. So
bodes
I think
well.
that's.
It's interesting though they're doing it in New Zealand. So,
Mhm.
but hey,
Yeah, but I just want to see the dog. That's it.
I
See,
got one of the Queen's corgis to play on. That's what they did.
yeah, that was great. Well, wait, I think all the Queen's corgis passed away already.
I think she got new ones.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, well, they haven't announced a release date, and yes, there's releases coming. So I'm pretty sure we'll get to talk about Way of the House Husband next episode or something to that effect.
That should be
There
our
was also,
next watch party.
oh
Way of the
boy.
House of
Well, I guess I do have to think about my next watch. Although I decided to just start continuing into season 3 of Midnight Diner. So, and now I'm seeing where all like everything referred to in the final 2 seasons, in the 2 Netflix seasons of Midnight Diner, there's references to things that happened in the past. Now we get to see some of that past play out in the episodes that I've been watching now. So it's been fun, and as I said, I just started season 3 of it. So there's my current watch, and that's for what it's worth. Finally, they announced this week that there will be a live action Ghosts of Tsushima movie. I don't know. Did you hear about that one, James?
Yes, I did hear about that one, and we saw that Sucker Punch tweeted that out and stuff like that. And I think it was a no-brainer. I think we knew that was likely going to happen, that if you're big enough, and especially given how that panned out, and especially the influences they had, we knew they'd probably do a movie on it, and Sony has it all, so I'm sure they'll go full gangbusters on that.
Yeah, and I think online petition has started for to get the motion capture actor behind Jin to actually play him this time in this movie.
Yeah, no, he did some great work. They had some great interviews on that. And there were some other ones the few weeks before where they were talking about Ghost of Tsushima. And the thing about that was interesting was the load times that they never really thought. I was like, oh, we're doing things. But somehow everyone is so amazed because it feels like a film because there's just no loading times at all. You're just going in like a living, playing movie like you've never
Mhm.
experienced before. And they said, oh, it was just optimization, all this other things. And they didn't realize how far we've come, that people had that visceral experience.
Yeah.
And you could even do it in black and white if you want the Kurosawa
Yeah.
version.
Well, well, you bring up an interesting point because this is why people are hopeful for this version, and it won't be a train wreck because of its inspirations. It was inspired by samurai films by Kurosawa. So there's a lot of high hopes that this will turn out very well. And considering a lot of the similar creative forces are here,
And I think the other thing was
we can be
this
hopeful.
one, remember, it wasn't done by Japan studio in Japan. It was done by Sucker
Oh,
Punch, which is North American stuff like that, and their inspirations in how many people in Japan, when they were playing it, they had a visceral reaction, said these guys did some great, fantastic work that they just weren't expecting, and they loved it too. People took it to their hearts too, even though it was from a foreign studio and stuff like that.
yeah. So,
So it crossed borders everywhere and stuff like that, and it's still going to keep going full circle,
mhm.
which is the power of pop culture, as we talked
and
about
there's
before.
the hopes. So that's all. That's like those are the two stories that caught our attention, and maybe we'll start to wind it down from there. Although I want to give Kevin and Mohamed a minute to speak because they hardly spoke in this segment.
Yeah.
Okay, do you and okay? I'll let's just say well, is there anything you guys want to add? I mean, you guys can mention whatever's in the queue. I'll give you guys the chance to right now before we go tonight. Is there anything in your reading and watching queue or something that you think we should pay attention to? Or
Nope.
that's it?
I
Nothing
mean,
you.
nothing really. I'm looking forward to Ways of the House Husband when that comes out in a week or two.
And as I said, we'll probably end up talking first impressions of that when we record again in a couple weeks, assuming it's 2 weeks again before we talk. Kevin?
Yeah, I didn't participate in the conversation mostly just because I didn't get around to listening to the presentation.
Don't worry. You're getting a passing grade.
I Thursday was when I was listening to the encore presentation of the manga editor.
Oh yes, that's
And that
right.
was when I was
What
watching
he was
too. I
doing.
didn't realize it was encore presentation because I mentioned that in our chat, Kevin, and I thought it was a new one, but no, it was encore of the Anime New York presentation we had seen before. But it was still fun, and all the people that were involved were there in the chat, so I'm sure they had a ball too.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing other manga editors in that live chat
Hmm.
as it was going on, and I I liked how prison school was brought up in the chat or in the presentation at one point, and then I was just commenting on how I really did like how Yen Press uh, did the lettering and the translation, and then I did get a comment back from the Yen Press editor, and he
I
was
can't remember if it was Carl. Yeah, Carl did
it was
that one,
Carl
right?
Lee,
So
yeah.
he talked to, he must have messaged you. Like they were all in there. It was interesting, as you said, other editors.
He mentioned how Ko Ransom, who translated the prison school manga, gave him a great base of uh a great translation base for him to work with when it came to like translating any potential jokes or
Hmm.
or situations that may have been a little tricky. So I thought that was a neat little tidbit of info that he provided.
Hmm. I missed the replay. So is there a chance to watch that again or not?
I'm not sure. I
Felt
didn't get
like it
around
was
to
on
checking.
YouTube still, right? But I'm not sure if the Anime New York one still is. Maybe the Anime News Network one might be on, but I'm not sure for how long. But it was definitely something still worth watching and stuff like that, and still relevant, as Kevin said, like them talking about their experiences and the other thing of does the editor, of course, need to know Japanese as well as the translator and their different beliefs and stuff like that on that.
Hmm.
And some were
Yeah.
stronger than other. And the one fella that worked is freelancing now, but used to do a bit of Kodansha and Vertical. He was more the belief you did need some Japanese and stuff like that because what if your translator isn't having their best more their best day and stuff like that? It's like so that someone needs to pick up the slack and stuff like that. But as most of them as they went on said, you don't need like to be fully fluent, but it's still good to know and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, we've had like it's an offshoot of the discussions of the thoughts we've expressed in recent episodes too.
And I guess it
Okay.
comes down to what other people have had thoughts on in regards to Seven Seas and light novels, which I know had a little update on that this week where they were going to offer an update on the ebook versions, and then some of the novels, when they were reprinted, would be properly corrected. I think that was for Classroom of the Elite, and then Jobless Reincarnation. Now, some of the other ones, hopefully that'll happen for them soon. But the funny thing I thought about that in regards to physical media, I'm sure Kevin would get a kick out of it, is when they talk about physical media, Kevin, and about those new paperback editions coming in like late April, May, they said
Mhm.
customers who bought earlier print editions can return them to or exchange them to the retailers where they purchased, subject to each retailer's return policy, which means you'll never be able to return them. You'll have to
Yeah,
rebuy. You'll have to rebuy that and hope you're getting the correct version. So you'd have to be in the store to know and look at that copyright page to know it is a second edition or whatever edition it's supposed to be, right?
That
Which
just
kind of
sounds
leaves you hanging when you're
that
on the
sounds so
physical
dickish.
yeah.
medium compared to
Is it
That
the
just me?
ebook.
that
Like
rubbed me the wrong way.
that just sounds so dickish.
That rubbed me
I
the
don't
wrong
know.
way because
Yeah, so you agree? Okay, cool.
And
yeah,
that
because
rubbed me the wrong way when I read it. And I was looking at it and I'm just like, I know there's a reason why this all sounds the way and why it should be that way. But I said it still just does not feel good when I read that.
like
Hmm.
you made the mistake. You should be willing to provide a replacement program. Sure, like, and you know what? The customer can bear the cost of shipping. That's fine, but really, like you're, because like if you go for a massive book chain, like even then that could be a bit of a stretch depending on when you bought it. But if it's for some of those older titles, because some of those were like older volumes, unless you
Yeah, and that's what
happen
I
to have
was
bought
thinking.
that, then you're just screwed. And good
Hmm.
luck trying to get an independent bookstore to help you out, because in most cases, it's gonna be final sale no matter what.
And as you said, some of those 7C stuff have had a tendency to go on a print and stuff like that. But a lot of people said they have been shaken in the face of 7C's light novel line. Mangas have been fine, but the light novel line definitely has been shaken. They were in damage control. The only thing I can tell people is if you are going to buy a light novel and you want to support Seven Seas, I've enjoyed Restaurant to Another World. I know they did a good job on the translation and everything is there that should be, and it's a fun series. But for some series, I guess we just got to see how it goes. And it's a new world with light novels because we don't have the pictures and all this other stuff. So you kind of have to hope that it was in good hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Okay.
Or as we said, we should spruce up on our Japanese and get an original edition.
Yeah, that would help too.
Also,
That looks pretty cool.
quick aside, Dempa announced that they licensed We Were 11, or They Were 11.
And that's the new version, right? Kevin and I saw like the 2019
Yep,
version that was to
the
celebrate 50
50th
years or
anniversary.
what.
The
Hmm.
50th anniversary, yeah.
And there's some parts that I think Viz did not release that were in that version that they're going to have, which will be nice.
Okay.
Yeah, we never thought that would have seen the light of day. Honestly, I
Because
uh,
that was early Viz
I have
that
to
they did
support
a
it.
bit of that, did they?
Sorry,
Hmm.
That was early Viz that they released some of We Are 11, I thought.
was
Or
that
am
in
I
Four
thinking?
JoJo stories?
I don't
That's
know.
I don't
my
know.
thing.
It could be maybe some of that. Maybe that's why I'm thinking it.
Because I
But it
heard a
was
couple of
very
people like in the tweet thread mentioning that. So I don't know for sure because I just never, I was too young when that
Okay.
came out, or I
yeah,
may
but
not even been
it
alive.
was way back. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I may not even been alive when that was coming out.
But
Okay.
Fantagraphics has released some of the old work by that creator, and now we're seeing more, which is always great to see the old stuff. And even I heard Rosa Versailles, the fourth volume. It sounds like it has finally come out. So if you want to track that down, Kevin, you better get on your horse. I think it's
Good
in
luck.
stock of chapters.
One
Mm,
one
It
last
is
thing.
expensive, I admit.
But
yeah.
before
Okay.
you completely end off, Mike, I just really need to mention this because in 4 days the world will become a better place. Angels will fall from the heavens and bestow upon us the Shaman King remake.
Oh, for
April
God's sakes.
1st, finally, the world will be able to start seeing the Hiroyuki Takei's magnum opus in animation form with a black character with improved lips and all the character having beautiful animation and quality. I'm hope quality.
Wait,
I hope it
But
sustains
Jeff,
itself.
Was that Netflix though? I couldn't
yeah,
remember.
Uh,
it
Yeah,
is
so I'm
Netflix.
not sure if there's going to be
Okay.
a bit of delay, but
It'll
So that's what I'm wondering.
exist in the world. That's all I care about.
Oh, okay, there you go. Because I was thinking
Okay.
it's
no,
probably going to
that's
be in
that's
Netflix
good.
jail for a while.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, thanks. No, I
No,
mean, I
when
know
it
you've
comes,
been.
then Jeff can gorge on all of it at once and enjoy a full experience. You know, I mean, he won't have to wait week to week, so it'll be full on.
Full report next time.
I think Common King will be popular enough to survive the lack of conversation, or people will just be watching illegally.
Now that too. Well, one last question, Kevin. Does anybody know the status of the Megumi Hayashibara autobiography? Is that out yet?
Okay, so it is out digitally.
Digitally.
And just to let you know, it has been solicited by Yen Press for August for the physical hardcover edition of that autobiography. And you can
Okay.
order that on Chapters, just to let you know, or Amazon. Take your pick. But let us wait for the sales, as always. Because I think it's $26.99 Canadian, just to let you know. And that's before tax.
Unless you really love it, unless you really love her, then just buy it anyway.
You can learn about her roles, such as Anna from Shaman King.
Yeah.
And
Sakes.
it's still one of the better Shonen Jump heroines.
Yeah, I admit, my admission is that could go either way. So we'll see. Like at what point I'll purchase. It's not a question of if, but how much.
The other thing is, remember, the ebook edition is cheaper and stuff like that, and more in line. It's not the $26.99. I forget what the price is, but definitely a lot cheaper if you want to go that route.
I'll look up the price on the Kindle version later.
And you'll be able to get it now if you want it.
Yeah.
That instant gratification.
If you want to take the read of it. Well, remember, I have two versions of Hello Friends, Jerry Howarth's biography. Mind you, I got the digital version for free as a thank you. Another story altogether. But thanks for letting me know. Before we go tonight, and this is the last thing I'll mention, quick programming note. I've been in touch with JP from Anime Lockdown. He's hoping to visit again in the near future, and we'll talk about where things will, with Anime Lockdown itself, stand. So that's something to look forward to. Hopefully we'll get a chance to have JP on the program within the next month. Look forward to it, okay? But in any event, that's all we have for tonight. One more time, a reminder where you can reach us. AnimeRoundtable@gmail.com, at AnimeRoundtable, AnimeRoundtable.com. Also, don't forget, if possible, to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, because reviews and good reviews might get us help in the algorithm and expose us to others who might want to listen to this show. Kevin?
Please rate us highly.
How many stars?
The usual. Not one. Preferably 5.
We typically do episodes once every other week, although we may do something in our off weeks too. That said, subscribe to us so you can be notified whenever we get on our collective soapboxes.
Well, if you really rate us 1 star, tell us why.
Yeah.
But I digress.
That said, subscribe to us so you can be notified whenever we get on our collective soapboxes and something new drops in the feed. Until next time, thanks for listening. Good night from Toronto. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable. That's an edit right there.
I was like,
rate us more than 1 star.